On my wedding day, my boss's daughter sent me a single line. "You're done. Cleaned out your office this morning. Call it a wedding present." I didn't cry. I didn't run to the washroom. I read it twice, set my phone face down on the linen, and reached for my husband's hand. He felt me tense and looked over. By the time he'd finished reading it, he was smiling the way a man smiles when someone hands him exactly what he's been waiting 11 months to receive. 3 hours later, my phone had logged 91 missed calls. I let every single one go to voicemail. My name is Ren. I'm 31, and until that Saturday in late September, I was the chief architect at a Toronto firm that moved freight for half the country without most of the country ever hearing its name. If you bought something online in Ontario or Quebec last year, there's a good chance a routing decision my code made put it on the right truck. I built the system, not helped build. Built. I wrote the first version of it in a Liberty Village apartment with a space heater that kept tripping the breaker, back when the company was the founder, 2 sales guys, and me. The founder was a decent man. I'll call him the old man because that's what everyone called him, and because by the end he'd earned a softer word than I'd have used for the rest of his family. He'd found me at a hackathon at Ma Eris, looked at what I'd hacked together over a weekend, and said, "I don't understand a word of how that works, but I understand that it works. Come build it for real." I did. For 8 years I built it for real. The problem with the old man was that he had a daughter, and the daughter believed that the company was a thing she would inherit the way you inherit a cottage or a set of golf clubs. I'll call her the heiress because she'd have liked that, and because it gets at the rot of it. She was 29. She'd been handed the title of Vice President of Operations the spring before, after a stint at a consulting firm that mostly involved making slide decks about other people's businesses. She had never written a line of code, never closed a freight contract, never sat across from a furious client at 6 in the morning when a winter storm had stranded 40 loads on the 401. But she had a last name on the door, and she had decided somewhere along the way that I was the obstacle between her and the respect she felt was owed to her. She wasn't wrong that I was an obstacle. She was wrong about what kind. The old man had been diagnosed in July. He'd flown to a clinic in Cleveland for a procedure he didn't want anyone talking about, and he'd be gone the better part of 3 weeks. Before he left, he pulled me into his glass office, the one with the model train on the shelf that he wound up when he was thinking, and he'd said, "Keep it steady while I'm under. She's going to want to play with the controls. Don't let her break anything we can't fix." I'd promised. I'd meant it. What neither of us said out loud was the thing we both knew. The heiress had been telling people at the office in that bright, casual way that the first thing she'd do with real authority was rationalize the engineering org. Everyone knew rationalize meant me. So when her text landed in the middle of my reception on the day she knew, because I told the whole office that I would be standing in a marquee tent in Prince Edward County with 300 people and a string quartet, it wasn't a surprise. It was a confirmation. She'd waited until her father was sedated in a hospital 1,200 kilometers away, and then she'd done the one thing he'd asked her not to do, in writing, with a timestamp, on a Saturday. My husband is a litigator. I'll call him my husband plainly because that's the word I'd waited a long time to be able to use. He specializes in the unglamorous, devastating end of employment and corporate law, the part where someone with money assumes the rules don't reach them, and he proves, slowly and expensively, that they do. We had not married each other expecting this exact moment, but we had spent the summer on the dock at his family's place in Muskoka, talking through what we would do if she ever moved while the old man was away. We had a plan the way some couples have a fire escape plan. You hope you never use it, you walk it through anyway. He read the text, set down his glass of rye, and said, very quietly, "She put it in writing." Not a question. "She did," I said, "on a Saturday, with no termination meeting. No cause cited, no notice. He was almost gentle about it. He was almost gentle about it, the way you're gentle about something fragile. Ren, she's not your boss. She doesn't have signing authority for terminations above the director level. That requires a board resolution or the founder's written consent. He's in a hospital bed in Ohio. I know. And the IP. He looked at me. Tell me about the IP again. I did. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see my sister watching us from the head table, her mouth a thin line. But I'll get to her. I want to be honest about something because this is the part people skip when they tell these stories. I had built a fortress and I had built it on purpose, and I'm not going to pretend I did it out of pure foresight and not also out of a quiet, stubborn fear that had lived in me since I was a kid, watching my mother get talked out of every dollar she was ever owed. When the company was small and the old man wanted my system, I didn't sign the standard tech employee's IP assignment. I had a lawyer, not my husband. This was years before him. A sharp woman in a Bay Street tower who charged me a number that made me physically ill at the time. She structured it so that the core routing engine, the actual mathematical heart of the thing, was licensed to the company through a numbered corporation I controlled. The company owned the application, the interface, the brand, the contracts. But the engine, the thing that made any of it worth anything, ran on a license that the company paid for and that I could revoke for material breach. Wrongful termination of the licensor was a listed material breach. I had insisted on that clause specifically. The old man had read it, laughed, and said, "You think I'm going to fire the person who invented the magic? Sure, kid, put it in." He'd signed it because he never imagined a world in which he'd want me gone. He'd been right, he never had. His daughter was a different person. So no, I did not gasp. I did not call HR. I slid my phone across the white tablecloth to my husband, and I let him read the wedding present, and I watched him understand that the heiress had not fired me. She had detonated a contract she didn't know existed, while the only person who could have stopped the explosion was unconscious in another country. "Let's give her the night," he said. "Let her enjoy it. Then, Monday." I agreed. And I lifted my glass, and I went back to my wedding. And for 2 hours I danced and I hugged people, and I ate the late-night poutine bar I'd insisted on against the caterer's advice, and I did not think about her at all. That was the part I was proudest of in the end, not the revenge. The 2 hours where I gave her exactly nothing. The trouble at the wedding itself didn't come from her. She didn't have the nerve to show up. The trouble came from my own family, which is the part that still sits heaviest. My sister is 2 years older than me. I'll call her my sister because every other word I have for her is worse. She had married a man I'll call my brother-in-law, who sold something. The product changed every 18 months. The confidence never did. Mutual funds, then a wealth coaching thing, then crypto, then a course teaching other people how to do the crypto thing he hadn't actually made money at. He had the watch and the leased German car and the loud opinions about hustle, and what he did not have, as I would learn in spectacular detail that night, was a single asset that wasn't borrowed. My mother. I'll call her my mother, and I'll try to be fair to her, though she made it hard, had spent 30 years deciding which of her daughters was the disappointment, and she'd never once picked my sister. I was the one who'd moved to the city, who'd gotten above herself, who didn't call enough, who'd had the nerve to do well at something my mother didn't understand and therefore distrusted. My sister had stayed close, married the loud man, given my mother grandchildren and a story she could tell at her bridge club. I had given my mother a job title she couldn't explain to her friends and a wedding she thought was too expensive. It was the poutine bar, of all things, that set my brother-in-law off. He'd been drinking the open bar like it owed him money, and somewhere around 11 he planted himself beside me, swaying a little, and said loud enough for the nearby table to hear. So I heard the news. "You're unemployed." He grinned. "Big shot architect. Guess the family business doesn't want you anymore." My mother, 2 seats down, did a thing I'll never forget. She didn't look shocked. She looked relieved. Like a long-held suspicion had finally been confirmed. "Well," she said, and she said it almost kindly, which was worse. "Maybe now you'll have time for the people who actually matter." I want to tell you I had a perfect line. I didn't. What I had was my husband's hand finding mine under the table, and the knowledge sitting cold and steady in my chest that my brother in law had recently asked me twice to take a look at an opportunity he was raising money for, and that I had quietly declined. And that the reason he was so delighted to hear I was finished was that he had told my sister, and probably half a dozen marks, that his sister in law, the tech executive, was about to come in as an advisor. I knew because my sister had let it slip at the rehearsal dinner that he'd borrowed against their house to make this latest thing look real. I knew the house was in my sister's name only because she'd told me that 2 years ago, proud that she'd kept something for herself. So when he leaned in and said, "Maybe you can finally come work for me, I'll find something for you," I just looked at him and I said the only true thing I had. "How's the race going? You told everyone at the rehearsal you'd closed it." His grin slipped about a centimeter. That was all. But it was enough that my sister saw it, and my sister had been married to that grin long enough to know what its slipping meant. The night ended. We sent the guests off with butter tarts in little boxes, the way my husband's grandmother had at every family wedding for 50 years, and we drove back to the inn through the dark county roads with the windows down and the September air coming in cool off the lake, and I slept the whole night. Deeply, like a person with no enemies at all. Monday is when it started. My husband and I did not go to the office. We went to his colleague's firm, a quiet practice in a converted warehouse near the distillery district, and we sat across from a partner who specialized in shareholder and licensing disputes. She read the termination text, the license agreement, the numbered company's filings, and my employment history, and when she was done, she took off her glasses and said, "She actually wrote this herself? No counsel reviewed it? She doesn't think she needs counsel," I said. "She thinks she's the owner's daughter. She's about to learn the difference between a name on a door and a name on a deed." The lawyer almost smiled. "Here's where we are. The termination is void on its face. She lacked authority. But that's the small thing. The interesting thing is the license. The wrongful termination of the licensor is a material breach. You have the right to serve notice, and if it isn't cured within the cure period, to revoke. The moment you revoke, the company's entire routing platform is operating on infringed IP. Every load they move is a damages calculation. I don't want to burn it down," I said, and I meant it. "The old man bills that. There are 600 people who get paid because of it. Drivers, dispatchers, the kids in support. I'm not torching their jobs to spite his daughter." The lawyer nodded slowly, like I'd passed a test she gives everyone. "Then we don't torch it, we use it, we serve the notice, we make the breach, and the cost of curing it undeniable. And then we wait for the only person who can actually fix this to wake up and find out what his daughter did while he was under." We served the notice that afternoon by courier and by email to the company's registered office and to the board. It was 4 pages. It was, my husband told me later, the most polite document he'd ever helped draft, and the most lethal. It said, in essence, the licensor has been wrongfully terminated by a person without authority. This constitutes a material breach. The licensor will revoke the license in 7 days unless the breach is cured. Cure requires full reinstatement, written acknowledgement from a person with actual authority, and a renegotiation of terms. It attached the license, it attached the text message, it attached the heiress's own internal email, which a friend in operations had forwarded me that morning without my asking, in which she'd written to the leadership team. "Removed the dead weight in engineering. The system runs itself now anyway. The system runs itself now anyway." I printed that sentence and pinned it above my desk at home, not out of bitterness, out of clarity. There's a particular kind of person who looks at something they don't understand, sees that it's working, and concludes that it must therefore be easy. They mistake the absence of visible struggle for the absence of work. She thought the routing engine ran itself because she had never once watched it not run. The board got the notice Monday at 4. By Tuesday morning, the heiress had called me 11 times. I didn't answer. By Tuesday afternoon, the company's general counsel, a tired man I'd always liked, who'd warned the old man more than once that his daughter was a liability, called my husband. They had read the license, they understood the exposure, the number when their own engineers tried to estimate the cost of rebuilding the routing engine from scratch, came back at somewhere north of $40 million and 18 months, during which they could not legally operate the platform they'd revoked the license on. The General Counsel asked very carefully whether there was a path to resolution. My husband said there was. He said it would require the founder's written involvement. He said we understood the founder was unwell and we were prepared to be patient, but that the cure period would not pause for anyone's convenience. That was Tuesday. The old man called me himself on Thursday. He sounded 10 years older. He'd come out of the procedure to 40 voicemails and a daughter sobbing that the company was being held hostage. He'd had his assistant pull the file. He'd read the license, the one he'd signed 8 years ago with a laugh. And he'd read the text his daughter sent me. And he'd read his daughter's email about the dead weight that ran itself. And then he'd called me from his hospital bed in Cleveland. "Ren," he said. And then he didn't say anything for a long moment. I told her not to touch the controls. "You did," I said. "I have spent 30 years," he said, building something I thought I could hand her. And she looked at the one person holding it together and decided you were in her way. He exhaled, shrugged. "I don't have the years left to fix her, but I can fix this." We negotiated for 3 weeks. "I'll spare you the clauses." What it came to was this. I did not go back to being chief architect, reporting to an org chart with the heiress somewhere above me. I would never do that again. Instead, the numbered corporation that held my engine and the founder's holding company entered into a joint venture. The routing engine, the actual heart of the business, would live in a new entity that I controlled with a majority stake. The operating company would license it on a long-term basis at terms that over 10 years were worth more than I'd earn in 3 lifetimes as an employee. The old man took a board seat in the new entity out of respect, and I let him because he'd earned it and because some part of me would always be the kid he found at Mars. The heiress was removed as vice president of operations. Not fired, the family didn't do public firings of family. She was transitioned to a strategic advisory role, which is the corporate equivalent of being given a desk in the basement next to the recycling. She kept her salary for a year and then it quietly wasn't renewed. The last I heard, she'd started a consulting practice helping other companies rationalize their engineering orgs. I hope they read the contracts. I did not bloat. I want to be clear about that. Because the part of these stories people cheer for is the gloat, and I understand the appetite. But the truth is the gloat was the least satisfying part. The satisfying part was a Tuesday in November, 3 months later, when I stood in the new entity's small office. 11 people. All of them poached with my own money from the engineering team I refused to abandon, and watched the system handle the first heavy snow of the season without a single load going astray. And realized that no one with a last name on a door could ever again decide whether I got to keep doing the work I loved. Now, my family. My sister called me in October, after word got around, after the cousins started texting her things like, "Did you hear what Ren did?" She didn't call to apologize. She called because the German car had been repossessed and the loud man's raise had collapsed, and the investors he'd promised an advisor he didn't have were asking pointed questions, and she had finally, after 11 years, done the arithmetic on her marriage. "I need help," she said. "He used the house, my house. He told me it was a line of credit for the business and it was a second mortgage, and now..." She stopped. "I didn't know," she said. "Ren, I swear I didn't know. Here is the thing I had to decide, and I decided it slowly on a walk through the ravine near my place with the leaves coming down. I could have said no. She'd watched our mother humiliate me at my own wedding and said nothing. Her husband had tried to use my name to defraud people. I owed her, by any fair accounting, exactly the kind of silence she'd given me. But she was my sister, and she had married badly and been lied to. And the wrong I'd suffered from my mother's tongue was not a wrong I could collect from my sister's ruin. So I told her this. I would not give her money. I would not invest in anything her husband touched, ever. But I would pay for a real lawyer. A good one, not a favor, to get her out from under the second mortgage and out of the marriage with the house intact, and I would do it on one condition. She had to actually leave, not threaten. Leave. I wasn't paying to rescue a marriage. I was paying to end one. She left him in December. The house is hers. He moved to Calgary to start over, which is what men like him do. They don't get better, they get new addresses. My sister works at a clinic now, reception, and she calls me on Sundays, and it's awkward and real and slowly becoming something like the thing we were before our mother taught us to compete for scraps of her approval. My mother. I let a long time pass before I spoke to her. She left voicemails that started angry. How dare I embarrass the family? How dare I ruin that poor girl's career? And curdled over the months into something smaller and more frightened as it became clear that I was not going to grovel my way back into the family's good graces, and that the daughter she'd called the disappointment was now the one with the means. When we finally talked, she did a thing I should have seen coming. She apologized for the wrong reasons. She was sorry she'd spoken out of turn at the wedding. She was sorry it had looked bad. She was not sorry for 30 years. She wanted, I realized, to be forgiven so that she could go back to her bridge club and say her successful daughter had come around. She wanted the version of me that made her look good. I didn't give it to her. I wasn't cruel. I didn't scream. I just said the truest, calmest sentence I had, the one I'd been building toward without knowing it my whole life. I'm not going to set myself on fire to keep you warm anymore. She didn't understand it. I didn't expect her to. I told her I loved her, because in the broken way you love a parent who failed you. I did. And I told her I would not be available for the role she'd written for me. And then I said goodbye, and I meant it, and I drove home through the first real snow of the year with the radio on, and I did not feel triumphant. I felt light. There's a difference. It took me 31 years to learn it. The old man passed in the spring. He'd had longer than the doctors promised, and he spent some of it on the board of my little company, winding the model train he'd had moved to our office, telling the 11 engineers stories about the early days when it was just him and the 2 sales guys and a girl with a space heater that kept tripping the breaker. At the funeral, the heiress wouldn't look at me. I didn't need her to. Afterward, his lawyer handed me an envelope. Inside was a note in his shaking hand. It said, "You kept it steady. I'm sorry I left you to do it alone. Build something she can't break." I have it framed. It hangs next to the printout of her email, the one that said the system runs itself now anyway. I like having them side by side. One man who built something and trusted the wrong heir. One heir who inherited everything except the understanding of what she'd been given. People ask me sometimes when I tell pieces of this whether I planned it, whether I built the license and structured the company because I knew, 8 years out, that a spoiled 29-year-old would fire me by text at my own wedding. I didn't. You can't plan for the specific shape of how people will fail you. What you can do, what I did almost without articulating it, is refuse to build your life on the assumption that the people with power over you will be decent. I assumed nothing about anyone's decency. I read the contracts, I kept the engine. I married a man who reads the fine print as a love language. And when the day came that I'd half feared and never wished for, I didn't have to panic, because panic is what you do when you're not prepared. And I had been preparing, quietly, since I was a girl watching my mother get talked out of every dollar she was owed. That's the whole of it. There's no secret. There's no trick. There's just this. Know what you're actually worth. Write it down somewhere that holds up in a courtroom, and never ever hand the only copy to someone who's told you they'd be happier if you disappeared. The heiress thought she was giving me a wedding present when she ended my career in 11 words on the worst possible day to try it. She was right that it was a gift. She was just confused about who it was for. I think about that sometimes, on the good days, standing in an office that's mine, watching snow fall on a system that does not in fact run itself. That runs because 11 people and I make it run, on terms no one can take from us. I think about her certainty, And I raise my coffee the way some people would raise champagne, and I say it quietly, just to myself, best gift I ever got. Then I get back to work, because the work was always the point, and it was the one thing she never understood, was never hers to give or take. The thing I keep coming back to on the quiet mornings when the office is empty and the snow is just starting outside the window is that none of it was luck. The heiress sent 11 words on the worst day she could pick, and she thought she was setting off a bomb under my life. What she actually did was pull a thread I'd tied off carefully 8 years earlier in a Bay Street tower with a lawyer I could barely afford. Cause and effect. She acted on spite, and spite is blind. It can only see the person it wants to hurt, never the structure holding that person up. I had built the structure on purpose because I'd watched my mother get talked out of every dollar she was ever owed, and I'd promised myself I would never be a woman who had to beg for what was already hers. If there's anything I'd want my own daughter to take from this someday, it's that the three things that saved me weren't gifts I was born with. They were practiced. The first was a refusal to win dirty. I could have torched the company and put 600 people out of work to spite one entitled woman, and I didn't, because the drivers and dispatchers and the kids in support hadn't done anything to me. Knowing where the line is and holding it even when crossing it would feel good is its own kind of strength. The second was the part nobody claps for. Reading the fine print, keeping the engine, marrying a man who treats a contract like a love letter. Being clever isn't about being the smartest person at the table. It's about doing the boring, careful work years before anyone is watching, so that when the day comes, you don't have to be brilliant, you just have to be ready. And the third was the hardest. Anyone can be brave for an afternoon. What it took to sit at my own wedding, read that text, and give the heiress 2 full hours of nothing. No tears, no scene, no satisfaction. That wasn't a feeling. That was a decision I had to keep making minute by minute, the same way I had to keep making it when my sister called in ruins and I chose to help her leave instead of letting her drown. And when my mother apologized for the wrong reasons and I told her, gently, that I wouldn't set myself on fire to keep her warm anymore. Steadiness like that isn't a mood. You build it the way you build muscle, by carrying things that are heavy until your arms stop shaking. The old man wrote me a note before he died. Build something she can't break. I think he meant the company, but I've come to think he meant a person too. You become unbreakable the same slow way you build anything that lasts, one careful, decent, stubborn choice at a time, long before you ever find out you need it.